Teen idols are some of the biggest forces throughout the history of Hollywood, and in the 1990s, the arguably biggest teen idol was Jonathan Taylor Thomas. JTT was one of the biggest stars in the world for teen and tween girls, and every week during the 90s, they'd tune in to watch JTT along with Zachary Ty Bryan and Tara Noah Smith in their hit show Home Improvement. Home Improvement was a massive hit for ABC. It was a half-an-hour family-friendly comedy where everything could be resolved in 22 minutes. But unfortunately, behind the scenes of Home Improvement and after the show ended, things were anything but family-friendly. The star of Home Improvement, Tim Allen, has faced many controversies over the years, ranging from loud legal troubles, including multiple arrests and prison time, to not-so-talked-about stories from the sets of his movies and shows, where he's allegedly made life very difficult for everyone he's worked with. And one of the biggest behind-the-scenes stories concerning Tim Allen was his poor treatment of Jonathan Taylor Thomas when he decided to exit the show. Today, Tim Allen is still a star, but when it comes to the rest of the Home Improvement cast, the headlines they're making are for things very far removed from acting. Recently, one of the Home Improvement former child stars has faced a string of arrests and legal troubles while also striking it big with crypto, thanks to the advice of his friend, another former child star, Brock Pierce. And Brock Pierce is someone else whose post-acting life has featured some extremely shocking headlines, including those about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and his infamous company Den, which on the surface may have been a brilliant idea, but due to some of the people involved who were committing the most unforgivable of crimes, Den was nothing more than a cover for vile actions. So while one Taylor son has been entangled in non-stop legal issues, the other two have vanished from Hollywood, with exits surrounded in controversy. So that's what we're talking about today. What happened behind the scenes of one of the most successful shows of the 1990s, and what happened to the stars of Home Improvement after the show ended. So sit back, relax, grab a drink and a snack, and let's dive in to the controversies, drama, and chaos of Home Improvement. Home Improvement was one of the most successful shows throughout the 1990s, and it even managed to stay in the top 10 of the Nielsen ratings for its entire 8-season run. Tim Allen was a huge star not only from Home Improvement, but he was also one of only 2 actors that had a #1 show and a #1 movie in the US at the same time. The other was Matthew Perry, who we actually spoke about in the last video on Friends. But Tim Allen hit an even further milestone than Matthew Perry, because in the 1990s, not only did he have the #1 show and the #1 movie, but he also had the #1 book in America. Home Improvement starred Tim Allen as Tim the Toolman Taylor, the host of a show within the show called Tool Time. Tool Time was a cable home improvement show that Tim Taylor hosted with his co-host Al Barland, who was played by Richard Karn. And there was another person involved with Tool Time on screen, which they weren't exactly a co-host, and they were referred to on the show as the Tool Time Girl. The Tool Time Girl has also been referred to as an object rather than a person by the actress who played Jill Taylor, who was Tim Taylor's wife in the show. The Tool Time Girl was originally a character called Lisa and was played by Pamela Anderson in her first TV role. This was even before she was on Baywatch, and she actually was doing Baywatch and Home Improvement when she started on Baywatch. Pamela Anderson did exit the show quite early on in its run, and she didn't leave on the greatest of terms at the time, which we will talk about later, but she was then replaced by a character called Heidi, played by Debbie Dunning. Tool Time and the whole show within a show was a focus for the Home Improvement show, but the bigger focus of the show was Tim's family. The Taylor family lived in suburban Detroit, and Tim was married to Jill Taylor, as I mentioned, who was played by Patricia Richardson. Jill and Tim had 3 sons. The oldest was Brad Taylor, played by Zachary Ty Bryan. The middle son was Randy Taylor, played by Jonathan Taylor Thomas, and Mark Taylor was the youngest son, played by Taron Noah Smith. The main cast was rounded out by the actor Earl Hindman, who played the Taylor's neighbor, Mr. Wilson, and it was later revealed that the character's full name was actually Wilson Wilson Jr. The whole gimmick with the Wilson character was that you never saw his face. He was always mostly shown as peeping over the fence talking to Tim Allen's character in their backyards. This was based on Tim Allen's memory as a kid speaking through his fence at his neighbor and never being able to be tall enough to see his entire face. During the 90s, TV shows, especially ones as popular as Home Improvement, had a lot more behind-the-scenes interviews and promotional material, and they even kept this gimmick up with Earl Hindman in a lot of these promotional materials. They would have him carry around like a little picket fence on some of the behind the scenes things, and they found comical ways throughout the show's run to obscure his face when he wasn't in his backyard. Obviously, the actor Earl Hindman had done other shows and there were pictures of him out there, but it was the 1990s. We were all on dial-up internet, so unless you were actively seeking that sort of thing out, I mean, we didn't even have social media where it's going to be just put in your feed and shown to you. So they were able to keep this gimmick going, and it's just something that obviously wouldn't really work today. Home Improvement was pretty much immediately a huge success for ABC and Disney, and they wanted to keep the show going into the new millennium. Home Improvement ran for 8 seasons from 1991 to 1999, producing 204 episodes. And in 1999, while making the 8th season, Tim Allen and Patricia Richardson were offered insane paychecks to keep the show going. Tim Allen was already being paid $1.25 million per episode. Again, this is the 90s, and the 8th season ended up having 3 episodes more than they usually did. They usually had 25 episodes. They had 28 in the 8th season, and that meant that Tim Allen took home $35 million for the 98 to 99 TV season just on his weekly per episode pay. Tim Allen also received payment as a consultant for seasons 1 through 5 of the show, and then he was bumped up to an executive producer for seasons 6 through 8. And executive producer pay is where the serious money is. But Tim Allen's acting and executive producer fees were small amounts compared to what he has made over the last 30 years from the syndication deals and residuals, as he was receiving, and still is receiving, a percentage on the back end. Throughout the show's run, Patricia Richardson received about a third of Tim Allen's salary, but she did also later negotiate a percentage on the back end, and so she was getting paid very well too through syndication and residuals. As I said, they wanted to make a 9th season of Home Improvement, so much so they offered Tim Allen $2 million per episode, which would mean that just his acting alone would make $50 million for the 9th season. Never mind the executive producer and residuals. Patricia Richardson was offered $1 million an episode if they did the 9th season, $25 million for the whole season, with her percentages on the back end too. Tim and Patricia had been faced with this exact same scenario the previous season, with Allen even announcing at one point at the People's Choice Awards that Home Improvement was going to end after the 7th season. When he did make that announcement at the awards ceremony, which wasn't something that was planned, it seemed as though everybody started to have a bit of a change of heart and they started throwing around even bigger numbers, and that's when they decided to go ahead with the 8th season. By the time they were trying to negotiate for the 9th season, it seemed as though they had all made so much money that it didn't really factor into their decision, and Patricia Richardson was the one who really put a firm close on the fact that there wasn't going to be a 9th season. Patricia has in recent years spoken about her frustration at the time with how a lot of the weight of ending the show was laid at her feet, because Patricia Richardson said that Tim Allen really wasn't involved and it was kind of left on her shoulders, and she ended up asking to be paid equal with Tim Allen, which she said she knew that Disney and the show and everything wouldn't do. So it was kind of her way of forcing their hand and them going out at the end of season 8. Patricia has also spoken in recent years about a lot of the frustrations that she had behind the scenes and a lot of the things that she had to fight for with her character, because she would say that there would just be nothing for her character to do and she just only existed in scenes with Tim, and there just wasn't really much for her to sink her teeth into. Part of her salary negotiations going on was that in later seasons, her character would have at least 4 episodes to have some sort of a storyline outside of just being a wife and a mother. And that's, 4 episodes out of 25, like, she really wasn't asking for much, but she said that every time she'd ask, can I do something more? Can I have a scene that isn't with Tim? Like, can I have anything? That the producers and the showrunners would just keep saying, but everyone loves you. The audience loves you. And she just was getting more and more frustrated. So there were storylines that they kind of seemingly were half-assing a bit with having her like go back to school and things, but nothing was really developed that much. Originally though, Patricia Richardson wasn't even supposed to be Jill Taylor. They originally cast Frances Fisher, who at the time was dating Clint Eastwood. Tim was not happy when the role was recast, as Patricia Richardson and others have said that Tim Allen liked the fact that Frances was dating Clint Eastwood and that he would be on set from time to time. The Home Improvement cast and producers and creators have all spoken at various points about feeling that the show was not treated as well as other successful shows at the time. Most of them have highlighted the lack of award nominations over the years, and many people involved with the show have spoken about the child actors in particular not being treated well. When the child actors' parents and representatives would try and negotiate for better deals for the kids, Disney and the show would actually hold fake auditions to recast the kids so that they were pushed into signing the deal, because they obviously were trying to make them feel like they were going to lose their part on the show. This would always result in the kids' parents and representatives backing down and just signing the original deal they were offered. The show was created and built around Tim Allen, who was a successful stand-up at the time, but he was very, very green to acting. He had no real experience with TV or acting. Initially, Patricia Richardson, who was an experienced actress, worried that Allen wouldn't be able to keep up or even know like a lot of the basics and cues and things like that, especially because they were filming in front of a live audience, which was pretty common in the 90s with things like Friends and That 70s Show, again, other shows that I've spoken a lot about. When casting the 3 young actors to play the sons of the Taylors, none of these 3 actors had any experience acting-wise or television-wise. Over the course of Home Improvement, the 3 young boys who played the Taylor's sons became very well known. Zachary Ty Bryan did do a lot of other shows and movies while Home Improvement was still on the air and for a few years afterwards. During Home Improvement, he'd appear on other shows like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Teen Angel, and he was in the movie First Kid, which put an enormous pin in First Kid, as the other star of that movie, Brock Pierce, is going to come back in a huge way for everything that we're going to talk about with Zachary and present day life, with his extensive legal issues and his crypto fortune. I swear I am also psychic, because I'm filming this on December 1st, and last night, like as I was finishing this bit of the script, I've had to go back and put this in, obviously. Zachary Ty Bryan was arrested again, and my last few videos have had freaky things like this happen. I mean, look at the last few videos: Smallville and Allison Mack interviews. My last video was on Friends, and they just, while I was making that video, released the unseen episodes of Joey's second season that were made 20 years ago, and they released it when I released my video. So there's just so many weird things. I mean, also the Stranger Things stuff with David Harbour. Some of those things, obviously, I'll hear sometimes about certain things that are coming out and plan to do a video, like that happened with Allison Mack and David Harbour. But there's absolute coincidences. Like, obviously, I didn't know that Zachary Ty Bryan was going to be arrested, nor did I know that Joey was going to be released after 20 years. Brock Pierce might be familiar to some of my longtime viewers, though, because he is someone I mentioned a lot in my Nickelodeon video from early last year. I think it was around February, March last year. And he was someone whose name came up a lot in this big predator group that surrounded someone called Mark Collins Rector, because Brock Pierce was friends and business partners with Mark Collins Rector, and Mark Collins Rector is involved a lot, or was involved a lot. Now he's on the run and can't come back into the US because there's a whole thing with that I will touch on when we talk later, but they are all connected to people like Bryan Singer and Brian Peck, who was the man convicted of abusing Drake Bell. So we'll get into all of that in just a minute, as it ties into a lot of Zachary Ty Bryan's like crypto stuff. Taron Noah Smith, who played the youngest son Mark, mainly just stuck to Home Improvement. He did do the odd other like one episode role in shows like Seventh Heaven, but the vast majority of his acting career was Home Improvement, which he actually did the auditions for when he was 6, and the final audition was when he was 7, and he was on the show until it wrapped when he was around 15 years old. Also, when he was ending the show, 15, 16, he ended up suing his parents over his trust from his money from Home Improvement. Also, when the show was ending, when he was 15, 16, he started a relationship and got common law married to a woman in her mid 30s who was 16, 17 years older than him. Again, he was 15, 16 when he met this woman, so obviously she was a predator. And we'll talk about that all in just a second, because obviously there's a lot to go into there. But the middle son was played by Jonathan Taylor Thomas, who became the biggest star from the show outside of Tim Allen. Jonathan Taylor Thomas, of course, had a very different demographic of audience than Tim Allen. Jonathan Taylor Thomas, or JTT, as all millennials will know him as, so that is what I will refer to him as. JTT did become one of the biggest teen stars of the 90s. His first big role outside of Home Improvement, which started in 91, was when he voiced young Simba in The Lion King, which came out in 1994. And The Lion King was, of course, massively successful for Disney. And JTT went on to star in tons of Disney movies like Man of the House, Tom and Huck, Pinocchio, Wild America, which had also Devon Sawa, who's another big 90s heartthrob. And JTT was in I'll Be Home for Christmas. I used to watch all of those movies with my sisters. It's really funny because the other day I had like a video call with my 2 friends who helped me edit on the channel, Evelyn and Rivka. And I was telling them, we're going to do Home Improvement for the next video. Evelyn and I are both gay, but all 3 of us were just like, oh my God, I love JTT, like, oh, his movies. And we're talking about all of it and stuff. I honestly think that the vast majority of millennial women did have a soft spot for JTT, which makes it even more interesting what happened with him and his career. Him leaving Home Improvement was a quite wild story, especially Tim Allen's actions. But Jonathan Taylor Thomas and his kind of exit from Hollywood is super, super fascinating to me. So we'll, of course, get into that in a little bit too. When they decided to develop the show around Tim Allen, he was asked if there was anything that the network and the show should know about his past. And Tim Allen told them, no, there's nothing you need to know. But just before Home Improvement went to air, reporters had dug up a lot about Tim Allen's past. In October 1978, Allen was arrested for possession of a very large amount of cocaine. He was arrested at the Battle Creek International Airport for possession of over 650 grams, just shy of 1.5 pounds of cocaine. He subsequently pleaded guilty to felony drug trafficking charges, and he did end up providing a lot of information to the police on the people he was working with and other dealers. So, in exchange for all of that information, he was sentenced to 3 to 7 years in prison rather than the possibility of life imprisonment. He ended up serving 2 years and 4 months and was paroled in June 1981. The higher ups at ABC and the show's executives decided that it would be better for Allen to just address his past rather than going the pretty common no comment route. And he did just that. And while it definitely was a story at the time, the only real mention after the initial bit of coverage and focus on it was, even if you watch stuff today about him, that whole thing with his past, it really is only focused on as a rock bottom to superstardom narrative. Like it really isn't explored in any way, which of course we know Disney has amazing PR, and Tim Allen has ridiculous money now too, which is why it is so easy to put out a lot of positive narratives despite how he behaves on sets of shows and movies still to this day. Tim Allen also did face legal troubles when he was filming Home Improvement, as he was arrested in 1998 for a DUI while in Michigan. He was driving double the legal limit and was sentenced to a year of probation and rehab. His rehab was dressed up as he and his co-star Earl Hindman just like to go and drink after the show, and Tim Allen recognized it was a problem and said he needed to address it and he needed to go to rehab. He made the decision when it was in fact court ordered, but he did go and do 30 days in rehab and return to the show. As I said, Home Improvement was pretty much a hit immediately, and this just opened all sorts of doors for Tim Allen. As I also mentioned, he had the #1 movie, book, and show at one time in the 90s, and the #1 movie that he had, when all of these other things were #1, was The Santa Claus, which was his first like big lead role. And this movie is super popular and even still watched at Christmas and stuff today. They did have 2 sequels for that came out in 2002 and 2006. And in 2022, they actually developed a series on Tim Allen's Santa Claus character. The series was called The Santa Clauses, and it ran from 2022 to 2023. The Santa Claus came out in 1994 during Home Improvement's 4th season, and the following year in 95, Tim Allen had probably the biggest and most lucrative role of his career, voicing the character of Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story, which I'm sure everyone knows was a massive, massive success for Disney and still is, with Toy Story 1, 2, 3, and 4 releasing from 95 through to 2019. And currently, Toy Story 5 is in the works, set to come out next year in 2026. I've mentioned before that my younger brother, who's like 15 years younger than me, is like a son to me, as my mom passed when he was quite young, and he was obsessed with Toy Story. I could literally perform Toy Story 1 and 2 as a one-woman play. Like, I know every line because we watched it over and over again so much. And you might see from time to time, I actually have a little alien tattoo because it was my mom's favorite character and she was like amazing at the claw machine. So my brother and my mom and I used to obviously watch Toy Story all of the time. I thought it would be a good tribute, and I'm sure you see it from time to time when I'm toying with my hands and flailing my arms around. Tim Allen did a ton of movies when he was on Home Improvement, and he has gone on to do even more. In the time that Home Improvement was on, he did movies like Jungle to Jungle, Galaxy Quest, Christmas with the Cranks, and more recent ones like Wild Hogs. He did also go back to network TV in the 2010s with his show Last Man Standing. It was on ABC from 2011 to 2017, running for 6 seasons, but the show was cancelled in 2017 despite being ABC's second most watched show at the time. ABC cancelled the show over controversy with Tim Allen. The controversy with Allen started when he appeared for an interview on Jimmy Kimmel Live, and he spoke about what it is like being a Republican in Hollywood. He likened it to, and this is a direct quote, "It's like 1930s Germany. You got to be real careful around here, you know? You'll get beat up if you don't believe what everybody believes." Of course, he received a lot of criticism for comparing the treatment of Republicans in Hollywood, very rich, famous people, to Nazi Germany. So the show was cancelled by ABC, but there was a lot of fans that went on social media and just did petitions and things like that. And so, as well, because it was doing so well in the ratings, Last Man Standing was then revived and put on Fox, and it ran for a further 3 seasons, going for a total of 9 seasons, ending in May 2021. Last Man Standing was another family-centered show with Tim Allen playing the role of Mike Baxter, who was a marketing director at an outdoor sporting goods store living in Denver, Colorado, with his wife and 3 daughters this time, and also his grandson. Last Man Standing had a number of guest appearances from Home Improvement actors, including Patricia Richardson and Jonathan Taylor Thomas. They even had Tim Allen revive his character of Tim Taylor on Last Man Standing. JTT also directed 3 episodes of Last Man Standing, which I've spoken about this before, but this is kind of an incentive offered a lot of the time to actors from a lot of the time popular shows, especially when they were younger. Say they were a character on a CW show or something like this, they were a child actor, and they will get offered to direct episodes to revive the character they were playing or guest star on another show that's kind of in the same sort of universe. Like a lot of the CW shows do that, where they'll have like crossovers and stuff. And they do this because these actors, a lot of the time, they want to direct, they want to be directors. And so you'll have people like Danielle Panabaker on The Flash, Tom Welling, and Allison Mack on Smallville, that it kind of keeps them on the show longer because they're being given these opportunities to direct. On other shows, they'll offer it to actors to kind of keep them sweet as well. Like they did that on the L Word Generation Q with Leisha Haley and Kate Manning directing episodes. And it's a big deal because it's obviously very hard to become a director and get to direct an episode of a popular show that's on TV. And when you do get to direct an episode of TV, especially shows like this, you will then be able to be admitted to the Directors Guild. And it's obviously hard for anyone to get the requirements to be admitted to the guild and things like that. So that being able to cross that off and be in the guild is a huge incentive for why a lot of the time these actors will kind of, okay, I'll play the character or I'll guest star, but I want to direct as well. I mean, there's so many examples that I could name. That 70s Show, Laura Prepon, there's been stuff with her. And also people like Gregory Smith, who he was in Everwood, that show that Chris Pratt and stuff were in the early 2000s on the WB. Gregory Smith, like he stopped acting after he was in his like mid-20s, and he's directed tons of episodes of The Flash and Arrow and loads of other CW shows. There was a lot of attention around JTT guest starring on Last Man Standing, and obviously because he was reuniting with Tim Allen, that was a big thing, and JTT hadn't done any acting in years by this time. But it also got a lot of attention because when JTT left Home Improvement, there were a lot of issues and tensions, especially with Tim Allen. And Tim Allen made no secret about how angry he was when JTT left Home Improvement. Tim Allen was also angry when JTT left the show, but didn't return for the series finale of Home Improvement. And he also spoke out about that and his frustrations and just his feelings on JTT in general and him not coming back to the show. When the cast were initially deciding to do season 8 and then they decided, yes, we are going to do it, JTT was the person who decided, I'm not going to do another season no matter how much money they offer. Instead, he wanted to focus on his education and go to college. He did guest star in 3 earlier episodes of the 8th and final season of Home Improvement, but as I said, he didn't return for any later episodes or for the finale. Over the years, many people involved with Home Improvement have spoken about Tim Allen's poor treatment of the child actors, and that absolutely is a story that has circulated widely about Tim Allen, and it's not just isolated to Home Improvement or just the kids from Home Improvement. There have been a lot of other actors and a lot of other people from sets of Tim Allen projects that have said working with him was very, very difficult. And there's a lot of actors, even from projects like The Santa Claus, that have spoken about their worst ever experience on set being working with Tim Allen because of his behavior. When Jonathan Taylor Thomas said he was leaving Home Improvement, Tim Allen was angered by his decision and treated him very poorly throughout the rest of JTT's time on the show. Tim Allen even went as far as speaking in multiple interviews about his annoyance with JTT leaving the show and really honed in on the fact that the summer before he went to college, he did the movie I'll Be Home for Christmas, which I don't understand why he focuses on that because they filmed that during the summer. Home Improvement, like most network shows, especially in the 90s, was on summer hiatus. So he's going to Harvard in the fall when they would start filming Home Improvement. But obviously, Tim Allen had many other grievances with JTT leaving the show. As I said, JTT went to Harvard. He did do a study abroad at St. Andrews in Scotland, which is where Prince William went to school. And eventually, JTT did transfer to Columbia, graduating in 2010. He did have this return in the mid 2000s, he took a break from school. That's why he graduated 10 years after he started school, because he leaves Home Improvement in the 90s. Then he goes to school 2000, 2001. He has a little brief return to TV, a couple of episodes of shows like Ally McBeal, Smallville, 8 Simple Rules, and Veronica Mars. And then in 2005, he disappears again. His last role in 2005 was one episode of Veronica Mars, and he didn't come back to acting until he was in Last Man Standing. He was in 4 episodes of that show from 2013 to 2015, and he directed 3 episodes from 2013 to 2016. With JTT being such a big star, the other 2 young actors on the show, their parents a lot of the time would try to get them more material and more focus on their kids. As I said, Taron Noah Smith retired from acting after Home Improvement, and he did get common law married to this much, much older woman, and they ended up getting married, common law married in Kansas, because there was a rule or law that you could have common law marriage, which is you basically live together for whatever certain number of years the state or country deems necessary, and you present yourselves to society as if you're married. And this law in Kansas, it allowed 12-year-old boys and 14-year-old girls to be the minimum age for common law. And because California recognizes the marriages and stuff of other states, they went to Kansas to get the common law marriage, went back to California, and at this stage when he's 16, he's ran away from home and he's then trying to access his trust fund. The common law marriage between Taron and this older woman was done because that also emancipated him from his parents because of getting married and the way it worked. And so when he returned to California, he was trying to get control of his trust fund, which was like 1.5 million at this stage. And then when he was 18, his parents' house wasn't actually his parents' house. They had bought it with his earnings from the show. So it was his house and he got it at 18. There was obviously a lot of attention on this at the time. And he was saying things like, oh, my parents are mismanaging my funds. But now, as an adult, he has divorced the woman, which there was a whole thing with they didn't actually need to get divorced because Kansas, when all this started getting a lot of attention, Kansas actually changed the law. So they weren't technically married anymore. And the older woman ended up suing him when they were going through their breakup because they had like this vegan business together. They had the first ever vegan truck, like food truck, and they had like a non-dairy cheese line and lots of other products. And when they were going through this lawsuit, that's when it was discovered, oh, you aren't technically married. And because it was like a big back and forth between Taryn and the ex-partner, ex-wife, he ended up just saying, I don't want anything to do with the businesses anymore and let's just fold it. He was also moving on to his new career, which he has now. And he did like reconcile with his parents. And he did come out and say, you know, my parents put the money in a trust. They did the right thing, which they couldn't even access the part of the money that was in that trust because that's the whole point of a trust. And everything is like fine between him and his parents now. And he actually works at SpaceX now. I did watch an interview that he did about 6 months ago. And while there was all this stuff with this predator and everything with the parents and the trust and stuff, he came off extremely well in the interview, in my opinion. And considering he was a child star and all of the stuff I've just talked about, it seemed like he's a pretty normal person and well adjusted. Obviously, I'm just watching one interview that was like an hour and a half, and obviously, I'll link it below in the sources along with everything else that I've used to make this video. But he started originally, like in his post acting career, working in submersibles because he grew up living on a boat in San Francisco and his dad was an engineer. His mom did work a bit in the industry. She worked on The Hand That Rocked the Cradle. And he decided, like, after he was like, I'm done with acting, that he liked what his dad did. He liked being an engineer. And so he got into submersibles. He ended up learning things like scuba diving and stuff. And long story short, he started working for SpaceX and he does the retrieval of rockets. Like when they land in the water, he goes out and does all of that stuff. And he also teaches people to pilot submersibles as well. So pretty interesting. And honestly, I really enjoyed watching the episode of the podcast because on the podcast, Taron talked a lot about his time on Home Improvement. He didn't talk too much about his like individual relationships with JTT or Zachary Bryan, although I do really commend him for just being so adamant on his feelings on Zachary Bryan, because it wasn't one of those wishy-washy Hollywood answers or like pussyfooting around what he was actually trying to say. He said Zachary Bryan has had a lot of legal issues in the recent years. He's been arrested for multiple DUIs, multiple times for domestic violence. He's doing horrible things. I haven't spoken to him in years and I don't want to speak to him. I don't want to hear from him. And I do commend him for being so, no, this is how I feel. And he can say what he wants and speak, I guess, his truth because he doesn't care like what about the Hollywood stuff, and it doesn't matter about his image or anything. I'm sure he just did the podcast for fun and, you know, reminiscing and things. And again, I thought it was a really good episode and just nice to see someone who was a child star who is seemingly living a nice normal life that they seem to be enjoying, and to not be tangled up in what Zachary Ty Bryan is. We're going to discuss Zachary Ty Bryant now, but just to mention, Taryn was actually arrested in 2012 for a DUI and possession of marijuana. The driving under an influence was marijuana. And obviously, there's only so much we can know from an interview, like I said, but he hasn't done really any press at all in the past 15 years. There's two other interviews since the show, basically. When he did this podcast, there were all these headlines like home improvement star emerges after 14, 15 years and is unrecognizable. And they were all saying that he hadn't done anything. But there was the home improvement reunion in 2011. But he also did a few interviews with Access Hollywood in 2018, and he actually did those with Zach Bryan. It was kind of bizarre because there just seemed to be no reason for it. And especially Taryn wasn't doing anything and had left Hollywood, and Zach Bryan was producing stuff. It just seemed to be out of nowhere. And it was actually 2019 that the show would be turning 20. So it wasn't like there was some home improvement anniversary. There's just two short clip interviews with Access Hollywood. One, they are asking Taryn and Zach about having crushes on Pamela Anderson. And Pamela Anderson had spoken out a few years after this interview about how she left the show, and a lot of it was to do with Tim Allen's behavior and he flashed her on set and things. And the other Access Hollywood little interview clip, they ask Taryn and Zach about Jonathan Taylor Thomas, and Taryn looks like really uncomfortable. And then Zach goes on to say that he speaks to JTT all the time and that he and JTT are working on a project with Macaulay Culkin, which obviously there's stuff all the time in Hollywood and business and everything that is being worked on and then goes nowhere. But Zach Bryan literally says it is going ahead and it's with Macaulay Culkin's company Bunny Ears, which Bunny Ears now, it's a website. It's kind of like a satire website that came out in 2017. There was a podcast as well years ago, and I do remember reading Macaulay Culkin's autobiography, Junior. I mentioned in the last video, one of my ADHD things is reading autobiographies of celebrities. So I remember reading that, and it's not done in just a usual way where it's, this is my life story. It's all like drawings and not full kind of stories, like bits and pieces and stuff, and a bit more like poetry, I guess is kind of the best way to describe it. But I do remember in that book that there was stuff about bunny ears and like drawings and things like that. So it seems to be like a brand that he's been building on that isn't just this website that exists now, and it still is being updated and stuff, but I never really hear much about it. Regardless, no collaboration ever appeared or was mentioned. I dug for ages and found nothing else apart from this interview in 2018,
adding that Jonathan was trying to do a mockumentary with Macaulay Culkin.
Never ended up going anywhere, but it was good to speak to him.
Actually, 2 years before it, in 2016, Patricia Richardson had done an AMA where she had said that Zach and JTT wrote an R-rated pilot that they were currently shopping around. I will talk more about JTT and the stuff that's kind of popped up over the years and what the most recent stuff is after we cover Zach Bryan. But just to wrap up the rest of Taryn and his current day stuff or recent stuff, Taryn actually co-wrote a book with his mom on child stardom in 2015. It does seem to be the majority the mom's project, but apart from this interview that came out 6 months ago and the interview with Zach in 2018, that's kind of it. Like, he didn't do any press or anything when his mom's book came out, and he just seems to be someone that hopefully is living as normal of a life as a former child star can. He seems to have a good job that he likes, and apart from all of the stuff when he was still a child and that predator woman was taking advantage of him, and also the stuff with the marijuana arrest in 2012, there hasn't been anything. So hopefully he is living the life he wants to, and has got away from the industry that he doesn't want to be involved in anymore, and he just can do fun things now and again if he wants to, like that interview. As I said earlier, Zach Bryan has just been arrested again. It is now the 2nd of December, it's a Tuesday, and he was arrested on the Saturday, the 29th of November, and this is just another in a long list of recent arrests. He's actually been arrested 6 times over the last 5 years. Like JTT and Taran, Zach Bryan had very little acting experience when cast on Home Improvement. He'd only come to LA a few weeks before being cast on the show. He's originally from Colorado, and his family actually took him to New York first, where he did a lot of like commercials for things like Ralph Lauren and Burger King, and JTT actually did a Burger King commercial before Home Improvement too. When Zach moved to LA, he actually lived for a few weeks in the Oakland apartments in Burbank. And if you don't know, these apartments in Burbank are pretty famous for having a lot of former child stars and just other actors live there before they got their big break. People like Frankie Muniz, Miley Cyrus, Josh Hutcherson, there's a list a mile long. So after Zach Bryan moved there, he pretty much immediately, within a few weeks, was cast on Home Improvement, and he was on the show for the entire 8 seasons and all 204 episodes. He was very in between Taran and JTT project-wise while on Home Improvement. He did do quite a lot of things, but they were either small movies or like 1 or 2 episode stints. It wasn't like Taran, who did barely anything except Home Improvement, or to the level of JTT, who was, a massive teen idol. Unlike JTT and Taran, though, he did stay in Hollywood after Home Improvement and continued acting. His Home Improvement fame helped him get into a lot of big shows in the early 2000s, just for 1 episode or maybe 2, but shows like ER, Buffy, Touched by an Angel, Smallville, and Veronica Mars. He did do a bit of movie work, the biggest of which was The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift that came out in 2006. He did go to USC at one point with his ex-wife, who was his longtime high school girlfriend, and they got married in 2007. They had twin daughters in 2014 and 2 more children in 2016 and 2019, and he moved from acting into producing a few years before he started having his first set of children. That was in 2009, 2010. His producer credits are very scattered. He did 1 project pretty much every year for 2010 to 2013, and then there's a big gap between 2013 and 2018, and then he comes back and does a few more projects, but this time as an executive producer through the end of the 2010s. I'm assuming this gap in the mid-2010s was when he started everything with crypto, but I want to discuss his arrest record first before we get into the crypto and his recent alleged scams. At the end of 2020 is really when things started to go downhill for Zach Bryan. In October of 2020, he was arrested in Eugene, Oregon, and he was arrested over police responding to a domestic dispute, and he was booked on multiple counts, including alleged felony strangulation, 4th-degree assault, and interfering with making a police report. The reporting at the time identified the alleged victim as his then girlfriend, Johnny Cartwright, and Johnny Cartwright will come up a lot in his personal life and his arrest record, as the most recent arrest that has just come out, like I've had to rewrite this bit, it just came out 30 minutes ago. She was actually arrested at the same time he was for trying to take him out by hitting him with her car. In February 2021, he ended up pleading guilty to 2 misdemeanors from the October arrest, and these ended up being menacing and 4th-degree assault in exchange for having the other counts dismissed. He received probation for this and was ordered to do an intervention program, and was also ordered not to have any contact with his victim. We're jumping now to June 2023, and I will go into this more. I just want to put it in the timeline with the arrests, but this is when a lot of the reports started coming out about his alleged investment schemes and fraud. The Hollywood Reporter printed multiple accusations from all different types of sources, claiming that they were scammed by Brian. All of these people's money that he had taken, he was claiming that he was investing them into a project that these people actually found out didn't exist. As of this year, there has at least been one court-ordered repayment plan issued to Brian over a lawsuit that was filed against him for this investment scamming. But as I said, we'll talk more about that when we finish going through the arrests. 1 month after all of these allegations started coming out about investment scams, in July 2023, Brian was again arrested in Eugene, Oregon, and Brian was booked on multiple accounts, including 4th-degree felony assault, 3rd-degree robbery, and misdemeanor harassment. In October 2023, he negotiated a plea deal and ended up pleading guilty to 4th-degree felony assault, domestic violence, and the other counts were dismissed as part of this deal. His sentencing was that he would do a short jail term, and it was reported that he was credited for the 7 days that he did spend in jail, and then that was it. He was placed on 36 months, 3 years of supervised probation with the typical conditions for domestic violence, which means no contact with the victim. That is important for the rest of the arrests. And the judge also warned that violating this probation could result in a prison term of 19 to 20 months at least. In February 2024, he was again arrested, and this time in La Quinta, California, and for a DUI. He had been arrested multiple other times for DUIs, the first one dating back to just a few years after Home Improvement ended in 2004. He was arrested after a traffic collision and booked on a felony DUI, and he also had a charge of a misdemeanor for contempt of court. The authorities indicated that the DUI was elevated because of all of his history, and they did end up trying to do a kind of additional charge because he'd had 3 or more felonies tied to a DUI. He was pretty much immediately released after he posted his $50,000 bail. 8 months later, in October 2024, he was arrested for his second DUI of 2024, and this time in Custer County in Oklahoma. He was booked under another DUI charge, but he also was charged for driving without a valid license due to all the other DUIs, and he was again just released pretty much immediately after posting bail. 3 months after the second DUI charge in January 2025, this was on New Year's Day, he was again arrested in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina on 2nd-degree domestic violence. The Myrtle Beach police stated that the alleged victim had apparent injuries and described being choked and punched by Brian. The report identified the woman as someone with whom he shared a child, and later reporting did connect this to his girlfriend partner, Johnny Faye Cartwright, who he was not supposed to be around. And again, he was pretty much immediately released after posting a $10,000 bond. That arrest was on New Year's Day this year, 2025, and he was just arrested a few days ago on the 29th of November, again in Eugene, Oregon, which is apparently where he lives now. According to all the reports coming out, he was arrested over violating his probation, and this was specifically tied to the 2023 domestic violence one because he wasn't supposed to be around his fiance, and he's currently still in jail because he hasn't been able to post bail. They haven't given him that option because it is a probation violation. He is supposed to go to a hearing tomorrow, December 3rd, so I will put any updates or anything if something significant happens. His fiancée, Johnny Faye Cartwright, was arrested at the same incident and booked on multiple counts, including a DUI, and she has a history of those as well, 3 counts of reckless endangerment for their 3 children, and 1 count of attempted first-degree assault, which that was what I was saying, where she had tried to run Zach Bryan over in her truck. At the time, their 3 very young children were in the car because he has had 3 more children with Cartwright, another set of twins. So he has 7 children altogether. And I did hear he had an 8th child with another woman, but I wasn't able to confirm that. As I said, he is violating his probation, which runs to 2026. So I would be surprised if there isn't some sort of consequences to his actions, although there hasn't been any as of late. The vast majority of Zach Bryan's legal troubles did start in 2020, although, as I did say, he did have a few DUI arrests in the early 2000s, but the vast majority of the legal troubles have been from 2020 onwards. He did return in the mid 2010s as an executive producer, and when he did come back to executive produce, it seems to be the way that he got into this is through taking the money that he made through crypto and investing it in projects. A lot of the time, executive producers either are people that are really, really involved, or they're people that it is a money thing. I mean, the money thing, the best examples are the executive or 2 of the executive producers of Buffy. They are a married couple called Fran and Kaz Kuzi, and they have never stepped foot on the set of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV show, in the 7 seasons it was on, yet they're credited as executive producers for every single episode. And that's because they partially financed the original 1992 Buffy movie, and part of the deal meant that they had ownership over the character and things, and so they are always credited as executive producers, and I'm sure they'll be credited on the new Hulu show that's coming out in 2026. Please don't be terrible. I'm guessing, having made a lot of money in crypto, this is how Bryan got into executive producing, as one of his first EP credits was on this movie called The Kindergarten Teacher, starring Maggie Gyllenhaal, and it actually premiered at Sundance and received tons of amazing reviews, and it won one of the Best Director prizes. Netflix actually acquired it for distribution, and his second EP credit was also something that was highly reviewed and had lots of acclaim. This was a movie called Skin, in which Jamie Bell plays a white supremacist, and it just was another one that really got great reviews. As I briefly mentioned earlier, the reason that Zach Bryan invested in crypto was off the back of the advice of his former co-star on First Kid, Brock Pierce, who, that movie, the Sinbad movie that they did together, they had a friendship from that point on, and Brock Pierce also played a younger version of Emilio Estevez's character in the Mighty Ducks. He played like the young Gordon Bombay, and Brock Pierce advised Zach Bryan to invest in Bitcoin right at the beginning, and Zach Bryan took a bit of his trust fund, put it in, forgot about it for years, and in that time it became millions, although he has never disclosed exactly how much. Sorry if things look slightly shifted. I recorded this point to the end of the video, and then for some reason my microphone turned off when I changed the battery in the camera, so I'm having to re-record. So anyway, I know I just gave you a brief rundown on who Brock Pierce was child star wise, but I can in good conscience not tell you, at least very briefly, what Brock Pierce is known for after he was a child star. He is someone I have mentioned before on the channel in my Nickelodeon video from earlier last year. I said this earlier in the video, and he actually is someone who is very smart. He was involved with this company Den that has ties to all kinds of vile people that preyed on kids.
The majority of young people today are not finding themselves reflected in television. We're creating content that specifically targets your needs, your wants, your desires.
And Brock Pierce also had lawsuits filed against him for similar things. To be clear, though, he has not had any convictions. He has settled suits, and there's so much lore that honestly it would take hours to go into everything with him, because a lot of that stuff, when you look up articles about him, it's not mentioned at all, or it's like a few lines or two, because he is one of the top 10 people whose profited from crypto. At one point, his Bitcoin portfolio was worth over $1 billion. He's called like the hippie king of crypto. And again, there's extensive history there. I do really recommend the documentary An Open Secret. It's on YouTube for free. Occasionally gets taken down, but I will put a link to it in the sources along with everything else for this video. And I do go into all of this in my Nickelodeon video and link up a lot of people that were involved with Den. Bryan Singer was an investor. Ben and Fred Savage were investors.
Hi. All right, shall we go in?
Your buddy's here.
Is that very exciting?
And there's just so many other people that were connected to it through all of these disgusting, vile parties that they used to throw.
Never been to a party here, though.
Never been to a party? Yes.
Some good ones?
Several.
Like, how crazy do they get?
A lot of the kids who were victims have spoken out in this documentary, An Open Secret. So especially if you're watching this channel, I really recommend either, if you don't want to watch my Nickelodeon video, watch An Open Secret, because it does go over everything. It is about 11 years old now, but it does give a good explanation about Den, about Brock Pierce and where he came from, and also the main guy and the main creep, Mark Collins Rector. So again, I recommend that. And it is something, Den is a video I would really like to do on the channel. I just don't know if it's one of those topics that people would be interested in, because a lot of the main players are people like Brock Pierce, who, yes, he was in Mighty Ducks and First Kid, but he's not someone that, you know, on a thumbnail or in a title, you're going to be like, oh yeah, I want to watch this video. But there is just so many people involved that I do think it would be a video. It would be hard to do, though, with a lot of the R-rated stuff that would be in it, but let me know below anyway. Oh, and one thing I forgot to say was I might touch on Brock Pierce in the upcoming Thorn video, which I'm hoping will be this month. I'm just working with some people that I'm trying to get all the information to them so they can get through it and then get through the rest of my information. But Brock Pierce did invest in a gambling company that Ashton Kutcher did. And Brock Pierce has ties to Epstein. He says they were only business ties, just to be clear, but we'll get into that in the future. Just like Brock Pierce, Zach Bryan was able to leverage his success in the crypto industry into being on boards and being an advisor to companies. There are scores of people who have spoken out about Zach Bryan scamming them and using his crypto success as proof that he was someone they could trust. These people ranged from other actors to women he met on Tinder and would go on a date with, to just people that were asking him for advice. Outside of the actors, everyone that he did business with, including the women that he went on dates with, said that he never mentioned his former fame or time in Hollywood at all. He presented himself as a wealthy businessman and even would show these people, despite them saying they don't want to see it, his crypto accounts and his bank accounts. Who knows if these were accurate or were old screenshots, because he wouldn't be doing this if all of that money still existed. Bryan insisted to these people that he would turn their investments into something great, just like what had happened to him with crypto. He said he had put a large portion of his crypto fortune into this same token that he was selling to these people. The token that he was having people invest in came off the back of a role that he was given in a tech startup called Producers Market in 2018, and Producers Market was focused around farmers. When Bryan joined the company, they did explore creating and selling a token to fund the company, and for 3 years almost, Bryan would go out and say that what was happening. He was looking for investors into this token as part of this company that was a farmer-focused company. From these people that were investing, he would take anything from $5,000 up to 6 figures, and everyone who invested with him said that he would keep them up to date and reply promptly. And he'd also randomly message them saying things like, Tom Brady just got involved and the COO of Starbucks. But Of course, that was all absolute garbage. And although Producers Market did explore the token in 2018, like I said, they did decide that same year against doing the token. Everything started to come crumbling down off the back of these arrests, though, because in 2020, when he was arrested, Producers Market ended up nixing his advisory role and not wanting to work with him anymore. It wasn't until the next year, though, that they learned what was happening with this alleged token and that Brian was taking investments for it. They ended up issuing him a cease and desist, and that's when many people started coming after him for their money. The 2020 arrest wasn't just the tipping point for Zach Bryan with his business and finances, though. His marriage had also ended, and his arrest in 2020 was involving his new partner, Johnny Cartwright. Hi guys, Editing Ash just very quickly jumping in to tell you I am going to call this woman Johnny throughout the rest of the video. Her name is Joni. I don't know what was going on in my head. Maybe I didn't have my glasses on when I read the name or something, but I apologize. Her name is Joni, not Johnny. Please excuse my blonde idiocy. So back to past me. And she was also involved in pretty much all of his arrests, and that includes the one that just happened a few days ago. Brian had 3 more kids with Johnny Cartwright over the past few years when all of these arrests were happening. He had another set of twins and 1 other child. The arrests I mentioned for assault were all involving Johnny Cartwright, and Johnny has also had a string of arrests, including several DUIs. I've actually had to go back and change this a little bit, as while I've been filming, more information has come out about this arrest on November 29th, which was Saturday. Today's Tuesday, December 2nd. Deputies in Eugene, Oregon ended up coming to the scene of a crash that involved a pickup truck, and Johnny Cartwright was driving, and the couple's 3 kids were in the back of the car, and the kids are very young. Zach and Johnny were driving together, and at one point, Brian got out of the pickup truck and began walking on a road called Big Fall Creek. Cartwright then attempted to run Brian over and ended up crashing the truck with the kids inside, and they crashed into a ditch. Brian was able to move out of the way and avoid injury, and no one in the pickup was injured, thankfully. The deputies interviewed Brian and Cartwright and observed serious signs of impairment, and so both of them were arrested. Of course, Brian was not supposed to be in contact with Cartwright due to all of the other domestic violence arrests and situations. And as of this afternoon, Tuesday, December 2nd, these are all the details. But if there are updates or more information that comes out, I will put like an Editing Ash section in or something. But he is still in jail because they didn't give him any bail because he's obviously in violation. That is pretty much an accurate update of Zachary Bryan as of today. And as I mentioned, as far as Taryn Smith goes, 6 months ago with that interview was the latest on him. As for Jonathan Taylor Thomas, every few years there are paparazzi pictures that generate a bunch of articles that will say things like JTT makes first public appearance in 3 years, and they act as though he hasn't left his house in 3 years, and they also act like him going for coffee isn't a public appearance. It's just because either a paparazzi happened to see him, or more likely someone has actually recognized him on the street and taken and sold pictures. JTT's last acting work was Last Man Standing in 2015, and his last directing was in 2016 for Last Man Standing as well. As I said earlier, there were things like the supposed pilot that he wrote with Zach Bryan, which I do believe because Patricia Richardson just randomly mentioned that in an AMA, and she does stay in touch with Jonathan Taylor Thomas based on something I'm going to mention in a second. And there was also the alleged project with Macaulay Culkin and Zach Bryan, but that was 9 years ago the pilot was mentioned, and 7 years ago the podcast or collaboration with Macaulay was mentioned, so I don't think there's anything going to come from that. Never mind that Zach Bryan isn't going to be getting anything like that for definitely the foreseeable, probably never. But the mention of the pilot was 9 years ago, and the project with Macaulay was 7 years ago, and I've never seen anything mentioned about either of them since those initial mentioned all those years ago, so I don't think anything's going to come from either of those. JTT hasn't granted an interview in years, and the last thing he did in any way related to Hollywood was when he was elected to the SAG-AFTRA board in 2018, because Patricia Richardson is very involved with it, and that's pretty much her involvement with Hollywood. When it comes to Home Improvement, obviously Tim Allen is still working and making millions, and there were rumors last year of a revival reunion of the Home Improvement cast, which last year was 25 years since the show ended, so that would make sense. Tim Allen has spoke about doing something with his character Tim Taylor and the character's grandkids. I'm guessing that would be the only way to circumvent the fact that JTT and Taron left Hollywood and haven't acted in a decade and have no interest in it. And Patricia Richardson doesn't have any interest in it either. And Earl Heidemann has passed away. And as we've just mentioned, Zachary Bryan is pretty much untouchable and would be a PR disaster. I think that the Entertainment Weekly 2011 reunion photo shoot for Home Improvement might be the last time that you see the entire Home Improvement cast together. Last year, there was a tiny bit of like Access Hollywood and Entertainment Tonight press around Patricia Richardson, Tim Allen, and a few other like smaller cast members going to the Home Improvement stage. And I guess they probably did ask Taron and JTT, but like I said, neither of them seem really interested and haven't done anything like that in so long. JTT doesn't have any social media or any sort of presence online, which it's not really that surprising what child stars go through, especially to the level that he was at. Like, he was such a huge teen star. I do feel like Home Improvement is kind of an odd show when looking at it as an entity. It was so successful. It was on for 8 years and it was in the top 10 every season. That's no easy feat. And it's always in those top family shows, top comedies, and it just was a really loved show. The creators also created The Cosby Show and Roseanne. It's just interesting how Home Improvement hasn't had any sort of second life on streaming, and really even now not so much in syndication. It was added to Netflix February of this year, and it's been on Hulu for close to a decade, and they did rerun a lot of the they just reran it all the time in the late 90s and early 2000s, and the stars were even making big money from the syndication of the show before the show even ended. But I just think there's more to the story about why it does seem to have just disappeared. You don't even really hear people talking about it that much. There were 2 lawsuits over Home Improvement syndication and streaming deals. The most recent was filed in 2013 and went on for 6 years, only concluding in 2019. The creators, writers, and producers said they were seeking damages in excess of $40 million from the $1.5 billion generated from Home Improvement. It was set to go to trial, but a few weeks before, I'm guessing because Disney didn't want a trial, Disney ended up settling out of court, and of course, classic Disney, no one is allowed to speak about it. But I'm guessing from the numbers batted around, Disney not wanting to go to a jury trial, and the fact the creators had nothing to lose at that stage, that the numbers were probably pretty significant, because really, if the number wasn't significant, they just would have gone to trial, because I'm sure a case like that, the lawyers would have been working on a percentage, and it had been 6 years at this stage. Like, they just would have gone for it. So maybe that is just why Home Improvement doesn't have the same longevity as a lot of those other shows. It's a mixture of the lawsuit, the fact that no one except Tim Allen really went on to have a big career, and most of the cast didn't do anything really afterwards. A lot of them aren't even in Hollywood anymore, and obviously Zachary Bryan's legal troubles, but that doesn't really affect much because there's a lot of Hollywood that has legal troubles. But I am very curious to know everyone's feelings on Home Improvement, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of comments about JTT, so let me know down below. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, leave MVP in the comments so I can personally thank you. Also down there is my Patreon, social media, G's social media, and the sources. G and I will be back very soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and G and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye guys!